horse. A small rudder on a huge ship in the hands of a skilled captain sets a course in the face of the strongest winds. A word out of your mouth may seem of no account, but it can accomplish nearly anything, or destroy it. It only takes a spark. Remember, to set off a forest fire, a careless, wrongly placed word out of your mouth can do that. By our speech, we can ruin the world, turn harmony to chaos, throw them out of reputation, send the whole world up in smoke, and go up in smoke with it. Smoke right from the pit of hell. This is scary. You can tame a tiger, but you can't tame a tongue. It's never been done. The tongue runs wild, a wanton killer. With our tongues, we bless God our Father. With the same tongues, we curse the very men and made this woman in his image. Curses and blessing out of the same mouth.
A priest, a rabbi, a pastor, and an imam all walk into a bar. What? That's not a joke. It's not that unusual. And in this case, it's just a gathering of a regular foursome of friends who meet for mutual support away from their congregation or denomination. Over the years, they've discovered all kinds of topics, and one day, it was the power of confession. They marveled with each other at what their congregants willingly confided in them. So one of the groups suggested they try it with each other, to deepen that openness and honesty, make it an even deeper experience of their friendship. And so the first shared, in fact, who suggested it, I have been wanting to tell you something. Really struggling. I think my drinking has gotten out of control. They all listened sympathetically. After a few moments, another spoke up. Since you were so honest, I want to tell you, I think I've gotten in a little trouble with gambling. In fact, things have gotten so bad, I've started eyeing the money in the offering plate as perhaps an answered prayer. Third said, I'm embarrassed to say it, but I have a crush on someone in my congregation. The fourth sat there in silence. Come on, they said, you could tell us. He stammered, well, you're not going to like it. I'm an incurable gossip. For a while, right? Sermon after sermon has been preached on this passage from James about the destructive nature of gossip, the dangers of the tongue, a restless evil full of deadly poison. As Nicholas said, a horse can be directed by a little bridle. An entire ship is directed by a little rudder. They can be controlled, but not the tongue. And just like a small flame, an ember even, can set a whole forest on fire, the tongue, one of the smallest parts of our body, can destroy communities and reputations and more. And being the victim can make us feel helpless. So Greg's car broke down one night in front of the Bahr in this small town Texas home. It sat there all night long. And the morning Betty, the Mrs. Kravitz of the witch from the neighborhood, started telling the story. And by noon, the story had become that Greg was a raging alcoholic who had left his wife, abandoned his children, and refused to pay child support. And no amount of explanation that his car had simply broken down could change the story. So he had an idea. That night he parked his car in front of Betty's house and walked out. By noon the next day, the story had changed. Greg had left his wife because he was having an affair with Betty. which is one way to deal with an incurable gossip. As I said last week, though it's considered one of the New Testament letters, James really has more in common with scriptures from the wisdom genre like the book of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, like such gems from Proverbs 10:19. The more talk, the less truth. The wise measure their words. So yes, gossip can destroy trust. Churches, families, organizations can all be destroyed by a rumor. It's a problem. But gossip is hardly the worst of our problems. Puny in the face of daily news. Decent people don't know what to do with what falls so easily off the tongue of our president. Media outlets have done everything in their power to call lies stretching the truth, massaging the truth, misleading claims, falsehoods, misrepresentations, untruths, fictions, fabrications, all in an attempt to avoid the overuse of the word liar about the occupant of the White House. Now, one argument for not using the word is that if it's used too often, the power of it decreases. It's so normal for the president to lie, it's not news. And to be fair, sometimes he doesn't lie. He doesn't always understand what he's talking about. But with the power of his tongue and tweet, America is diminished every day. There seems to be no bottom to what we think must be now the bottom, to which then there's another bottom, and we are far from it. Also, no end to the excuses for his behavior. For one important reason, but I'll get to that later. But lies, slander, gossip, they're all small potatoes. Walter Brueggemann, fierce social prophet, one of the best biblical scholars alive today. And he has some other suggestions for the most destructive deceptions of the tongue. Ideas that he actually articulated long ago, long before this era we're living in. And the first he said is false advertising. Words that make us feel as though we are incomplete if we don't, and you name it. Maybe it's obtain what is trying to be sold. The problem, though, isn't with simple claims like bigger, better, whiter, brighter. It's all those words that make us feel like we are not enough as we are. But while false advertising makes false claims, propaganda, Brueggemann says, creates false policy from false facts. Alternative facts, maybe even. Propaganda is its second deception. Building a wall is supposed to keep the hordes of Mexicans from crossing the border, who we've heard many times must be stopped because they're rapists, drug dealers, and we can assume some are good people too. But one needs false facts for propaganda. Describing the horrors of hordes of Mexicans makes it possible to justify ripping children from their parents' arms and locking them in cages, though, of course, fact check, most of the victims were not Mexican, but facts don't matter. And propaganda is simply a means to an ideology, which is Brueggemann's third deception. Ideology, which is fundamental to our nation's conflict. The ideology of America, to me, at its best, is liberty and justice for all. A democratic system that welcomes the participation of every citizen. Competing against that, however, is a different interpretation of America, not the philosophy of the people, by the people, for the people. Instead, this ideology is of the right people, by a few people, for the people who've earned it or deserve it because they're real Americans. It's an ideology built on a three-legged stool of white privilege, male superiority, and Christian supremacy. America's never been perfect, but each generation has made progress to making it a more perfect union. But again, Again and again, it comes into conflict with that three-legged stool, cleverly or not so cleverly hidden in little words that sound as soothing as mom and apple pie as they fall off the tongue. Some of which include safe streets and family values and patriotism. But safe streets, I'm not telling you something you don't know, is code for locking up people who aren't real Americans, creating a crisis of mass incarceration, which, mixing racism with greed, has proven quite profitable, allowing prisons to become a source of wealth. Amen. Not to mention the bonus of disenfranchising large numbers of the wrong voters. And then turn that money into free speech and turn corporations into people. Add to it a little religious freedom to discriminate, call birth control an abortion-inducing drug, and voila. White privilege, male superiority, Christian supremacy. Which, when you think about it, that's exactly what makes Russia so great. What is the ideology behind the Wall Street Journal headline this week about Nike and Colin Kaepernick? It described him as the man who kneels against the national anthem. That was the headline. How dare this black man be so unpatriotic? Why wasn't the headline about the man who kneels to protest the epidemic of police killing unarmed black men, women, and children? Little words reveal bigger story. Secure borders rationalizes Islamophobia. How can you be against secure borders? There's an immigration crisis because more of them aren't Norwegians. Xenophobia is the immigration crisis. And on we could go until we're exhausted, angry at the people who excuse bad behavior, feeling insane as we try to make rational what is utterly irrational. Except that it's not. It's not irrational. It's terribly rational for those willing to do anything to achieve, again, the ideology of white privilege, male superiority, and Christian supremacy. And the president is its greatest cheerleader, and willing to do it by any means necessary. And why would anyone object? James said, a bridle in the mouth of a horse, or the rudder on a large ship, or an ember from a raging fire, the smallest of objects, can change the course of their directions. And all along I was thinking, gee, that darn tongue, source of all our problems, evil, deadly poison. What if instead we consider the wisdom of this passage is that something as small and simple as a bridle in the mouth of a horse, or a rudder on an ocean liner, or a single ember from a raging fire, the smallest of objects, can change the direction and is all we need. Because blessings and curses come out of the same mouth. You know, the tiniest of minorities turned the course of history this week for 1 billion people. India is a culturally deeply conservative country. A law put in place 100 years ago by their colonial oppressors criminalized same-gender relations. And this week, the Indian Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional, which had been done before and undone before, because the majority didn't want it. But a tiny, tireless little group kept up the pressure, enduring harassment, beatings, and imprisonments. Imagine a few hundred people, maybe a couple thousand people, in a population of 1 billion. Chief Justice Mitchell said that the LGBT community possesses rights like others, and majoritarian views and popular morality cannot dictate constitutional rights. Veils of social morality can't be allowed to curtail the rights of others. So, what can something as small as a congregation like this do to change the course of history in America? And if you laugh and say, oh, nothing, well, I'll leave and I'll go get a job at Starbucks instead. Because if all we do, the only reason we gather together here is feel better about ourselves, then I'll give up the ministry. But faith, as small as a mustard seed, that's all it takes. And that's why we're here today. That's why we came back home, for the inspiration to keep using our tongues for good, to bless the world, not for evil. To keep proclaiming the ideology of an open, inclusive, just, and compassionate world. And I don't really care so much for the word ideology, because to me it just means following the teachings of Jesus, words and actions, and working together with people of all faiths for human privilege and gender equality and the supremacy of nothing but love. That means we have to be present wherever hatred roars, to sing of love. And wherever fear stalks, to stand with courage. Wherever bigotry rages, to call for justice. Wherever pain overwhelms, to extend comfort. Wherever systems oppress, to work for change. That's where I ended my sermon when I finished writing it. Then I went home and I watched President Obama's speech. And he gave me the perfect last line. And when a bully attacks,